Welcome to the FanDuel Punch-Out. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Josh Shepherdson at Chad 50. And we're talking about tonight's slate of action, of course. And going to be an interesting one. We got a game at Coors Field, so we all know what that means. 10 total games on the slate. A couple other games actually have pretty decently high totals as well. We got the Cincinnati-Chicago Cubs game has a 9-run total. I believe it's 8.5 in Arizona. So interesting things, but definitely some weather concerns in Ohio, as there always are. So keep your eye on that. But we'll just proceed as normal, assuming that there aren't going to be any random flash floods in Cincinnati tonight.
Yeah, let's hope not.
Yeah, definitely not. All right, let's start off here at pitcher. It's going to be an interesting one because obviously you're going to want a piece of that 11-run total in Colorado. So saving money where you can is essential. And we're just going to jump right down to a guy that you and I both like. I'm sure we're not the only ones on him. Andrew Heaney, $7,000, facing off against Boston, a team that's in the bottom 10 in WOBA and WRC Plus against lefties this year. And Heaney's been terrific especially in his last 3 starts. 7 1/3, and 7 innings pitched. 17, 14.3, and 17 fantasy points. And these were some tough matchups, too. Faced the Yankees, who were very good against lefties. Had a game in Colorado where he went 7 1/3, didn't walk a batter, 5 Ks. Last one at Seattle, obviously not quite as impressive. I mean, this kid has pitched very well. And at a $3,500 difference from Matt Harvey down to Andrew Heaney tonight, it almost makes sense because you could fit a lot of big bats in with Andrew Heaney tonight.
Yeah, and it can't go without. We can't not mention the Vegas line here. And Harvey goes in as an underdog, and Heaney checks in as a sizable betting favorite tonight. And that's assuming that the odds makers are correct. That's a 4-point swing if Heaney gets the W and Harvey ends up pitching a quality start and getting a no decision or a loss. And I mean that's a huge that's plus $3,500 and getting spotted 4 points. Give me Andrew Heaney all day, every day. So I love Heaney tonight. I think Harvey makes for an interesting GPP play because the upside is so substantial. But as far as cash games, with that 11-run total at Coors Field, I just can't see paying up for Harvey. Gio Gonzalez, Harvey's opponent, makes another interesting GPP play and a secondary cash games play. He's $2,400 more than Heaney at $9,400. He is the betting favorite. He is at home, and he is facing a hapless Mets offense. So probably a better bet for the win than Harvey. I mean, at least odds makers thought so upon opening line. And then beyond Heaney, I'm looking at a few other cheap arms. I'm looking at Ruby De La Rosa, who's a betting favorite against Miami. The Marlins still not as imposing a lineup as they normally would be with Giancarlo Stanton in it. And with Stanton sidelined, I don't mind trotting out guys against them. And then Matt Moore makes for an interesting GPP play. Price is $6,400, coming off of his best start since coming back from the disabled list and recovering from Tommy John. Velocity's actually been fine. He's Brooks Baseball has his fastball clocking in at 92, 93 miles an hour, and still featuring a changeup that can miss some bats, curveball, and his cutter's been his real bat misser this year. So I do think he's not too far off from being very good. And while the Phillies are much worse against righties than lefties, they are middle of the pack offense against lefties. So I don't mind Moore, who is a big betting favorite on the road.
Yeah, and outside of that, I mean, it's a pretty thin night for pitching, so those are the guys I'm looking at. And like you mentioned, Harvey's a fine play in your GPPs, and I mean, if you want to go with him in cash, you like the rest of your lineup, I mean, I don't think he's a bad play necessarily, but like you said, an underdog, and I mean, you look at just what his point total has been. He only has gotten the win 3 of his last 10 starts. It's not like he's pitched badly in all those starts. I mean, 5 of those starts, he has at least 15 fantasy points. So, but I mean, you look over his last 6, and he's got a 6-point game, a 9, a 1, a 10.66. You're not paying over $10,000 for a guy who, I mean, he hasn't hit 20 points in any of his last 10 games. And I mean, you're paying ace price for him. So, like I said, I don't think he's a terrible play, but I much prefer Andrew Heaney. I think he's a fine option, cheaper. Especially, you and I were talking before the show, it's a doubleheader today. So, it's possible Boston rolls out some of their bigger bats in the early game. Maybe we see some guys like David Ortiz, who's not good against lefties, sit in that game. And then that just makes him an even more enticing option anyway.
Yep.
All right, catcher options. This one's going to be interesting. I'll go ahead and just say our favorite 2 guys that we were talking about earlier. Robinson Chirinos, the righty, obviously in a great spot against the lefty at Coors Field. He mashes lefties anyway. And Chris Rusin, not so great against lefties or righties anyway. And Kyle Schwarber finally got that catcher eligibility that I know you specifically have been waiting for. And he's at 2,600. He's a fine play. But if not one of those two guys, really the only guy I'd be looking to play is Victor Martinez at 3,600 against J.A. Happ.
Yeah, beyond that, it's a punt position, I think. But because we're in that Andrew Heaney camp of paying $7K at pitcher, we can afford to roll out Chirinos at $3,000, or Michael McHenry or Nick Hundley, if whichever one is behind the dish for the Rockies. And then, but I love Schwarber tonight. Really great park factor for home runs there at Great American Ballpark. 4 left-handed batters. Michael Lorenzen has been absolutely hammered by left-handed batters this year, so I'm all over Schwarber. He'll have a more favorable lineup spot than Chirinos. I think Chirinos is going to be more popular because he is at Coors Field, that big total. But I love Schwarber tonight.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think it's going to be either he or Chirinos for me in most part in cash games tonight. First base options, another one of those chances where you can get guys for cheap that you wouldn't normally be able to get for cheap. My favorite of the cheap options is going to be Ben Paulson at $2,600. He should be batting around 6th in the order tonight. Obviously, he's a lefty against Nick Martinez, who's actually better against lefties than righties, but not a whole lot of that's going to matter for an average at best pitcher in Coors Field tonight. And I think you and I agree, if you're going to be paying up, Prince Fielder isn't a lefty-lefty matchup. He's a fine spot, but at 4,400, he's tough. I think Anthony Rizzo, you just mentioned Lorenzen struggles against lefties. It's a 431 WOBA allowed. Rizzo in Great American Ballpark. $3,900 is just too good of a price for him. I think if you're paying up, that's the way you got to go.
Yep, I agree. The name that I have slotted in right now, it's a couple $100 more than Ben Paulson, but another cheap option at first base. That's Justin Bour. Bour gets a break from playing at pitcher-friendly Miami Marlins Stadium in Miami to go to Chase Field tonight, where the ballpark factors are much more favorable for hitters. He hits right-handed pitching pretty well. Has a 192 ISO, 128 WRC plus in his career in the big leagues, and those numbers are weighted down by some mediocre numbers in his first look in the big leagues last year. Been better than that this year, and Ruby De La Rosa struggles in a big way with left-handed batters. So I am liking Bour. He does typically hit cleanup for them, so really nice lineup spot, really nice ballpark factors, good pitching splits, good hitting splits. I mean, everything's lining up in Bour's favor tonight.
Yeah, and I'll throw out one more guy for tournaments. 2 3-hit games in a row. Joey Votto gets a lefty-lefty matchup, but it's Clayton Richard, and Votto one of the better in the game in lefty-lefty matchups. So I think he's a fine tournament option as well.
I agree.
Second base options. Your boy, Rougned Odor, now the most expensive second baseman on the board tonight, $3,900. Doesn't hit lefties particularly well. He's not terrible against them. I think he's fine option tonight, but to pay $4K for him is going to be really tough. So a couple other middling options that I'm looking at. DJ LeMahieu, of course, not a whole lot of upside, but 5.5 run team total for Colorado tonight tells you his $3,100 price tag is more than fair. And then right below him, Brandon Phillips I like at $2,800 against Clayton Richard, or Cesar Hernandez at that same price, facing off against Matt Moore, switch hitter there.
Yeah, second base really, for the most part, stinks tonight. I'm with you. Maybe grab one of the middling options or punt. The guy that I'm looking at for punting with is Johnny Giavotella at $2,300. Assuming he continues to hit leadoff, at least he'll have a favorable lineup spot. But remember, this is a doubleheader. It's possible he gets the second game off. So keep tabs on that. But really, second base, just not a lot of favorable matchups. The two guys in Coors, you got Odor in a lefty-lefty matchup, LeMahieu in a righty-righty matchup, so you're not getting the favorable platoon splits for either one. Of the two, I do like LeMahieu more based on price and the fact that his team has a slightly higher team over at 5.5 compared to 5 for the Rangers. So not a bad play, but most likely I'll be punting this position, so I'll be looking at lineups and seeing if maybe somebody gets a surprise lineup spot.
Yeah, I'll be doing that along with you as well. Trying to save some money at probably the weakest position tonight. And next up, third base, where you really have two options at the top. These are the guys that are going to comprise, I don't know, if I had to guess, probably 70% of lineups across the board. Either Nolan Arenado at $5,000 or Adrian Beltre at $39,000. I think they're both fine plays. I prefer Arenado, but you also have to pay an extra $1,100 for him. So if you don't have the money, I think Beltre is a fine option. And really, those are the two guys I'm trying to play in most lineups tonight. Anyone else, though, that you play, probably going to be a pretty contrarian play. due to the fact that these are the two big hitters, two of the biggest hitters really in that Colorado-Texas game tonight. But Todd Frazier is the guy I'm looking at if I'm going to come off those two guys at all. He's only 3,500. We know the kind of upside he has, especially against lefties and especially at home. So Clayton Richard could be in for a long night. Assuming the weather holds up, I think that Todd Frazier is my favorite tournament option that's not at Coors Field.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I mean, if you're not paying for those two, I really think you need to grab somebody with a high ceiling, somebody with the opportunity to hit a home run. And obviously, Frazier brings that to the table. Really better against lefties than righties, gets a bad lefty tonight. So there is some merit to using. I wouldn't go that route in cash games, as you said, GPP pick. I think you do have to go with one of the top two in cash games just because they're going to be so high owned. I do expect both Beltre and Arenado to have good games tonight. So you're really putting a lot of stock in Frazier, matching them essentially, when you can simply roll with the crowd and you get a bad game, so does everyone else. There's a little bit more comfort there, but in GPPs, it's rare that you can say Todd Frazier against a bad lefty at home is a contrarian play, but that's just what he is tonight, and one with as high a ceiling as anybody else in the position.
Yeah, absolutely with you there. I'll throw out one more guy that I kind of like as well. Kyle Seager against Alfredo Simon, 2,900. Obviously, I'm not going to live up to your tout the other day where he ended up going for 2 home runs. But Alfredo Simon, not exactly good against lefties so far this season. 393 WOBA allowed is pretty embarrassing. So among the other Seattle Mariners that I like, I think Seager probably the best price of all of these guys with some upside.
Yep.
All right, shortstop. Just look at the top name. His name's Troy Tulowitzki. You click him, and then you click the next position, right?
Yeah, that's where I'm at tonight. I mean, if you're going with Harvey in cash games, you're going to have to do something else, I suppose. But or you're going to have to skimp someplace else. But Troy Tulowitzki, head and shoulders above the rest at shortstop tonight. Priced like it, but he's going to be incredibly high owned. The ceiling is way higher than anybody else at the position. So if you're not paying for Tulo, you're really running, especially in cash games, you're taking what I think is an unnecessary risk. But if you are going to come off of him, we both looked at Jung Ho Kang. Good price point, under 3,000. Yordano Ventura is a fine pitcher, but he's not. We're not talking about an elite level right-handed pitcher. Gang has really thrived as a regular since he's gotten to fill in for Josh Harrison at third base, and has hits in 9 of his last 10 games, has multiple hits in 3 of his last 6, has shown off some power. He's got a triple, he's got a homer in his last 6, and he has a good lineup spot hitting 5th, so he is an option. I guess you can always punt the position too, depending on where some of these guys hit in the lineup tonight, but it's really Troy Tulowitzki and then not a lot else. And there is another name that you did bring up. He is very cheap, just $2,600 in that same game as Gong, and I like this play.
Yeah, I like Eugenio Suarez. He's a guy who's been swinging a hot bat since coming up for the Reds, replacing Zach Cozart. $2,600 gets, once again, Clayton Richard, who I'm not a believer will be in the major leagues much longer other than out of necessity. Hit a homer and a double yesterday. I think he's in a fine spot. I mean, he's been making good contact. He's looking patient at the plate. I like him quite a bit. And then I'll throw out one more cheap guy just in case you have to have one. I'll go with Brad Miller, another lefty against Alfredo Simon. Assuming that he's leading off, and he has quite often against righties, then I won't say quite often, but a few times. At $2,300, I think he's a fine punt also.
Yep.
All right, outfield options. My favorite option, I think yours as well, Charlie Blackmon, $5,000 against Nick Martinez. And I actually came across a stat accidentally here a couple minutes ago. Nick Martinez has hit 12 batters with pitches this year. No one else has hit more than 9. So just an added little aspect here for a guy that's wild and terrible. So I'm not saying he's going to hit anyone tonight. I'm just saying that keep that in mind. The guy is just a terrible pitcher. Had his good start to the season, but Blackman's the guy that you want. He's a great cash game play. He steals bases. He hits for power. The guy just does it all. Price right below Mike Trout, who I think is, of course, a fine option, but we don't need to tell you that. He's always a fine option. But you're going to want Coors exposure outside of Charlie Blackmon. If you can't afford him, you got $500 less. I think his teammate Carlos Gonzalez is in a fine spot also.
Yeah, between the two, obviously I'm with you. I'd prefer pay up for Blackmon, but if you can't, Cargo, He's hit right-handed pitchers at home well this year. He's hit them well throughout his career at Coors Field. So, really strong play. Delino Shields is a guy that I like at 4,100. Not a lot of right-handed bats from the Rangers to pick from, but their leadoff hitter's right-handed, so he's going to get the first crack at Chris Rusin, who struggles with right-handed batters in a big way. Love the Shields tonight. Looking below those price points, I'm eyeballing Hunter Pence a little bit. Don't love San Diego, but Pence has hit well, and he's really been a spark plug for that Giants offense, driving in some runs, tallying some extra base hits. Really locked in, and his price really hasn't caught up to what he's been doing. And Kennedy really isn't that tough on right-handed batters either. He since 2012, since 2013. He's allowed a 335 WOBA to right-handed batter, so definitely not a guy to shy away from. Also looking at a guy that you like at $3,000, Christian Yelich against Ruby De La Rosa. We know De La Rosa struggles with left-handed batters since 2013. Has allowed a 384 WOBA to left-handed batters. So you're going to want some of those left-handed Marlins in there, namely Bohr and Yelich are the guys that check in for me. And then a guy that I like, assuming the weather holds off, $2,700 Marlon Byrd. Byrd hits for a lot of power. In case you haven't noticed, we do like picking on Clayton Richard tonight. Not very good. As Justice said, he might not be long on big league time. And there's a couple other cheap names that you like. Why don't you throw those guys out there?
All right, I'm going to throw out one more middle guy, too, that I had kind of forgotten about earlier. Josh Hamilton has actually hit lefties pretty well at $3,000. Other cheap guys, Rajay Davis should be leading off against a lefty at 2,500. Hasn't been particularly good recently, but, I mean, he's the guy that can do it all. He steals bases. He can score runs. J. Happ, as we know, prone to implosion. So if he gets going, then definitely some big-time upside there. And then outside of that, there's a couple other cheap guys. You mentioned Gregory Polanco is a guy that isn't in a terrific spot. Obviously, Sal Perez pretty good at holding runners, but he's a guy who's actually been hitting. Gotta like him. If Ryan Rua's in the lineup, you and I were talking about him as a fine swerve there, $2,300. Not a guy that hits lefties particularly well, but when you can get a guy with some power for $2,300 in Coors Field, I think he's a fine option. And then also Brandon Barnes, $2,900 as a fairly cheap way to get some exposure to Nick Martinez at Coors Field.
Yeah, when there's an 11-run total on the board, you want to get as much exposure as humanly possible. So definitely file some of those names away.
Absolutely, and that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out our Optimizer Colossus, all of our cheat sheets. Great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.